Welcome to today's web session. I'm Linda Czipo, President and CEO of the Center for Nonprofits, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2020 election voting procedures and nonprofit engagement presented by the Center for Nonprofits and the League of Women Voters of New Jersey. We thank you for taking the time to join us today. Center for Nonprofits, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, is New Jersey's statewide umbrella organization for the nonprofit community. Since 1982, the center has strengthened New Jersey's nonprofits individually and collectively to improve the quality of life for the people of our state. Our programs include advocacy, education, professional training, expert information and referral, cost-saving programs, and much more. Feel free to check out our website or contact us to find out more. The Center for Nonprofits is also a member of the National Council of Nonprofits, which is the nation's largest nonprofit network. The council is an advocate, central coordinator, and mobilizer, which helps nonprofits achieve greater collective impact in local communities across the country. If your organization is a member of the Center for Nonprofits, you are automatically a member of the National Council of Nonprofits. And if you are a member of the Center for Nonprofits, we appreciate your support and involvement as we all pursue this work together. If you're not a member, we hope you'll consider joining. If you've been attending our webinars, if you're on our email list and have been keeping track of the advocacy work that we've been doing, if you've benefited in any way from our work, we hope you will consider supporting it by becoming a member. It's also an investment in your organization, and you can tap into a wide array of discounts and benefits. And again, it helps to amplify the collective work of our state's nonprofits, and it amplifies the nonprofit voice. So please feel free to visit our website or contact us to find out more. One of our signature programs is our annual conference, which is the largest annual conference for nonprofits in the state. It combines forward-thinking insights with great connections, practical tools, and takeaways. Like so many others, we've had to rethink our conference due to COVID-19, and we are going virtual this year. So please save the dates for December 2nd and 3rd, and we'll be announcing more details about the program and registration and whatnot, but please be assured that we are working hard to make this as memorable and compelling as you have come to expect. Our theme this year is Reckoning, Reshaping, Rebuilding. It's a reflection of the times that we are living in, and the focus will be to help nonprofits work together to navigate the times that we're living in. I'm going to be bookending today's session, and joining us behind the scenes are Susan Merrill O'Connor, our Director of Communications here at the Center for Nonprofits, along with Caitlin Giles McCormick, our Program Coordinator, and Kathy Hahn, our Office Administrator. And we are thrilled to partner with the League of Women Voters of New Jersey on this session, and Jessie Burns will be sharing her insights in just a few moments. So in terms of today's agenda, Jessie's going to start us off with some important information about this year's election procedures, vote by mail, and other important voter engagement items. And I'll jump in a little bit later with some refreshers and some do's and don'ts for 501c3 nonprofits who want to be involved in voter engagement. We do have a lot to cover, but as always, we're recording today's session, and you will receive a link to the recording along with the slides and any other follow-up information via email. If you have questions or technical difficulties, please enter your question to the chat box or the question box. And feel free to ask substantive questions at any time. We do have a couple of periods set aside for Q&A, but if there's a question that we can't address during the presentation, we will do our best to follow up afterward. By way of a reminder, this is not a legal presentation. If you need legal advice, please contact a qualified attorney. So let's get started. The late Congressman John Lewis pretty much said it the best. Your vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have to create a more perfect union. We know that there is so much at stake. Voting is central to a democracy. And this year, there are plenty of issues that are at stake. So we have a responsibility and an opportunity as nonprofits, as individuals, to be involved. So, of course, the big thing is that this year, everything is different. Vote by mail is the default in terms of casting your ballot in New Jersey this year. There's so many new rules and procedures and whatnot to keep in mind. But fortunately, we are so grateful to have the League of Women Voters of New Jersey and Jessie Burns and her team who have been staying on top of all of this. And I'm so grateful that Jessie is on hand to share the latest information about how vote by mail is working here in New Jersey, what will happen, and what actions to take. So I'm going to turn things over to Jessie, who will lead the next segment.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today to talk about COVID and the impact on the elections. And I just wanted to say I'm looking forward to the center's conference, virtual or in person. It's always one of the highlights of my year and such a great learning opportunity. So I'm looking forward to attending in December. I'm going to be referencing a couple of websites that I want to put up front. Vote411.org is a league-run website. It has information for every state. So no matter where you are in the country, there's information, state-specific information about COVID and how it is impacting elections, what the rules are in your state. And it also has information about candidates on your ballot. I encourage folks to check it out, vote411.org. And I'm also going to be referencing the New Jersey Division of Elections website that they launched specifically for this general election, vote.nj.gov, with the 2020 New Jersey Voter Information Portal. Both of these places are excellent resources and where everyone should go for information. So just a little bit of voter registration talk, since voter registration is absolutely essential. The voter registration deadline is October 13th. It is coming up, so that is step one. Make sure everybody is registered to vote. You can register if you are a US citizen. You can register at 17 years old in New Jersey, but you cannot vote until you're 18. You have to have been a resident of your county for 30 days before the election to register to vote. And if you are currently incarcerated for a felony conviction, you cannot. But new this year is that individuals on probation or parole are eligible to register to vote. This number of folks on probation or parole comes to over 80,000 people that got their right to vote back March 17, 2020. We are working very hard to make sure that everybody in this population knows that they are eligible to vote and participate, but definitely challenges because of COVID reaching folks on parole or probation. So it's a call to action to make sure that these folks are registered to vote. You should re-register if you change your name, your address, or you complete your sentence of incarceration. New this year, you can register to vote online. This is doing really, really well. The last numbers I saw about how many folks have registered to vote using New Jersey's voter registration portal. So this is the Vote 411 portal, but it brings you to this, New Jersey's voter registration, online voter registration portal. It was over 200,000 folks registered in the first couple of weeks of it being available. That is amazing. We did hit significant obstacles registering folks because of COVID. So the online voter registration is really helping make up the gap of people that we weren't able to reach this summer. New Jersey's voter registration is exceptional because it allows you to vote to register using either your driver's license or your non-driver ID through the MVC or a social security number. So unlike some other states in New Jersey, you can actually sign your screen or upload a signature, making it easier for folks without MVC issued ID to register. Something that is really, really important for this year, this is also available on the New Jersey Voter Information Portal, is to check your voter registration status. So this portal here allows folks to put in their first name, their last name, their date of birth, and then it'll populate with information about your registration. If nothing comes up, you're not registered to vote and you need to do so. But if stuff comes up, it'll tell you things like your voter ID number, which you should make note of, It'll tell you where you're registered, so the town and county, and it'll also tell you if your status is active or inactive. You have to make sure you're an active registered voter at the correct place, because your vote by mail ballot is being mailed to that address. So the couple of actions that I hope folks take from this section is to make sure they check their voter registration status. If they need to, they register to vote or update their voter registration, and they help register others. The ability to register online means that you can just kind of tweet out a link, send out a text, an email, whatever it takes to make sure that everyone you know is registered to vote. Now, the big thing for this election is vote by mail. So all active registered voters are automatically being sent a vote by mail ballot without needing to apply. The majority of the state has actually already received this, that I think. I think most counties I've talked to, many voters have received it. The counties had until today to send them out. So you could still be receiving them this week if some of the counties sent them out today. But if you don't receive your ballot by October 12th, voters should contact their county clerk. So basically give them this week to get to folks, and if they don't receive them, contact their county clerk to see what's up. This graphic is from our friends at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, and it talks about the options for casting a ballot. So this election is a paper ballot election, meaning everybody's going to vote using a vote by mail ballot or a paper provisional ballot at the polls. So there are lots of options to cast your ballot. Once you receive it, you can mail it back through the Postal Service, making sure it's postmarked by 11/3. You can drop your ballot in a secure drop box by 8 p.m. on election day, 11/3. Counties are required to have 10 drop boxes each, but I think every single county has more than that. The lowest I've heard was 11, and the highest I've heard so far was 18, but I think there's actually more coming. So you can bring your ballot to your county board of elections by 8 p.m. on 11/3. New for this election, which we didn't have during the primary election, is you can bring your vote by mail ballot to your polling place on election day. Please note, you can only bring your own ballot to your own polling place on election day. And I'll talk a little bit more about barriers later. And you still have the option to vote in person using a provisional paper ballot at your polling. This is the information that's available through the New Jersey Division of Elections site. I wanted to just kind of show you everybody how easy they're trying to make this. They have the deadlines here. So like I said, if you mail it, it's postmarked by November 3rd, and it has to receive by the Board of Elections on or before November 10th. They extended the time it takes, a ballot can take to be received by the Board of Elections once it's mailed, to account for any possible mail delays. But as long as it's postmarked November 3rd, it's okay. It's going to be okay if it's received by the 10th. The ballot drop box, the polling places, and the Board of Elections are all 8 p.m. November 3rd. So close of polls on election day. The New Jersey Division of Elections also has the drop box locations available. This is a screenshot. It continues to go on, so there's more information, but you can click on your county and find where all the drop boxes are located that you can return your ballot. Just use your own county ballot drop boxes to return a ballot. Don't drop your ballot into a different county's box. A couple of things that I want to make sure that folks are aware of. For many, using a vote by mail ballot is a new experience. So we want to make sure that people understand kind of the common mistakes, why it might be rejected. And in the primary election, some of the things that we saw was that the ballot, a lot of ballots were rejected because they arrived too late. So people can avoid this by making sure they cast their ballots early, or that they use other methods other than the Postal Service, such as the drop boxes, the Board of Elections, or bringing it to the polling location. The second thing that we saw was the certificate missing. When you get your vote by mail ballot, you'll get an envelope that has several things in it. And there is going to be the ballot itself. Please vote both sides of that ballot using blue or black ink and following the instructions carefully. Then there's going to be a certificate envelope, which is a little bit smaller of an envelope than the second envelope included. And it's going to have a certificate on there where you sign it to certify that you are who you say you are. And then you seal that. It says on that flap, it's like, do not detach, do not remove this. You don't tear that certificate off. It's very tempting because it has the tears. You do not tear it off. That is for the election officials to remove, to maintain the secrecy of your ballot, but to certify that you are who you are. So do not take the certificate off. That is one of the things that we do see a lot. People need to keep that on. Seal it, and then you place that into the return envelope that's included, following the directions, making sure that the barcode is visible where it says to be visible, and then you seal that envelope. Another reason we see ballots rejected is on that certificate, you have to sign it. If folks forget to sign it, or if their signature is determined to not look like the signature that's on record for them, that's going to temporarily reject that ballot. Voters that fall into this bucket will receive a cure notification to fix that mistake. And then the other thing, unfortunately, that we see is that folks forget to enclose the ballot. This is, honestly, I almost did this during the primary. I had all the different pieces and I was going through and I was filling out the certificate very carefully, and I almost sealed it without returning the ballot. So it sounds silly, but it's actually really easy to do. So folks just need to take their time and follow all the steps carefully. So the signature missing mismatch, I talked a little bit about that, but basically what's going to happen is the County Board of Elections is going to meet multiple times a week starting October 13th. So even before Election Day. And they're going to start looking at those certificates to verify the signatures. So if they're missing or they determine they don't match, that's going to trigger the cure process. They'll have 24 hours after making that determination to notify the voter. In most cases, the notification is going to come through the mail. It's going to explain to the voter what they need to do in order to correct that mistake. And the voter is going to have until 48 hours before the final certification of the election to return that notification form. But like everything in this election, do not wait, do not wait, do not wait. Make sure that if you do get a cure notification form, that you fill it out as quickly as possible. The other thing that's really important for this election is that voters understand that they can track their vote by mail ballots. When I mentioned the voter ID previously and said just take note of that, you can use your voter ID or you can use other information like your driver's license, your social security, depending on how you register to vote, to open up one of these accounts to track your ballot. So when you do this, you set up this account on this Track Your Ballot site through the New Jersey Division of Election. They'll let you know if your ballot was sent to you, if it was received back. It'll let you know your voting history. There's a lot of great information, and it's set behind this wall because it's information just for the voter. So you have to set up the account. A lot of great information about your ballots. But why it's important is people want to be ensured that their ballot, once they send it back, either through the postal system or hand it right to an election official or through a ballot drop box, that it's been received. And then after, if your ballot is rejected, it'll make a note in this portal as well of that. Your voter ID is also located on your vote by mail ballot, so you can get that there as well. So bearers. A bearer is anybody who transports and casts a completed ballot for somebody else. So we want to make sure that people understand the bearer regulations, because what we see a lot in the nonprofit community and just kind of folks who want to do a good deed, they ask a question about, can they just kind of gather their neighbors' ballots and put them in the drop box for them? And the answer is no. Whenever you take somebody else's ballot for them, you are now a bearer. And you have to complete, there's a bearer portion on the envelope, the outer envelope. It says to complete this. You have to complete that in front of the voter before taking their ballot. You can't serve for a bearer for more than 3 voters in an election, and you can't serve if you're a candidate. So you have to make sure that if you are taking somebody else's ballot from them, that you follow all of these steps. Action items here, I just want to make sure that everybody kind of understands how to get their ballot, cast their ballot, track their ballot, knows how, what common mistakes are and how to prevent them, and is able to help others. Like I said, you can still vote in person this election. The municipalities are required to open at least 1 polling site. Voters who do cast their ballot will be using a paper provisional ballot. Provisional ballots that are eligible are counted. They're just counted after they ensure that that voter didn't already cast a vote by mail ballot. So what they'll do is they'll go through all the vote by mail ballots first before the provisional ballots, and then they'll go through the provisional ballots. Folks think that provisional ballots aren't counted, but that's not true. They are counted. We just need to do have voters use provisional ballots for this election because everybody's receiving the vote by mail ballot, and there's no way to know whether or not there's no preventing them from casting both if you allow them to vote on a machine. That being said, the individuals with certain disabilities are going to have access to an ADA conforming voting machine. These are folks who can't vote using a paper ballot. And the polling place locations are also available on the New Jersey Division of Elections site. They're there in 2 ways. They have a list by county. They also have their polling place locator. It is updated. They continuously update it for the general election. And folks will receive a notification in the mail as well with their polling place. You want to make sure that everybody's aware that they might not be voting at their regular polling place this election, and that they look up where their polling place is going to be, since not all polling places are going to be open prior to heading out on election day. So we created this nonpartisan voter engagement toolkit. It's available on our website. This is just a snapshot at the top. There's a lot more information of the table of contents. So what we're trying to do here is, for all these action items that I mentioned, is make it as easy as possible for nonprofits to share out this information in a way that's, works for them. So we have a bunch of voter education resources to the things that I talked about. We have information about Vote 411. We have templates that nonprofits, businesses, individuals can use to send out accurate voting information. We have social media graphics that can be downloaded and shared, handouts, we have press releases, we're adding more information letters to the editors. We also have volunteer engagement opportunities. This site is being updated pretty constantly, so if folks have things that would be helpful that you'd like us to put together, we'd be happy to do that and put it up on the site. So if anybody has any questions, I actually got through that pretty quickly, so we have a lot of times for questions after Linda talks a little bit about what institutions can and cannot do. I'd be happy to go through the specifics.
There was one question in the chat that I'll ask now, and I had a question as well. The question here is, can you put your ballot in your own mailbox and put your flag up for your postal person that delivers your mail to pick it up?
Yes, you can use your own mailbox, and it's a perfectly great option. It's how before we had the ballot box drop off, secure ballot boxes, that's how most people did use vote by mail, just putting it in their residential mailbox, and their postal carrier takes it and delivers it for them.
Okay, great. And the other question is, you were talking about the provisional ballot, and that kicks in if the vote by mail has not been received. So the assumption is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, the vote by mail submission is the one that takes precedence. So you can't, for example, change your mind and then go to the polls and vote provisionally on election day if you wanted to vote for something else or change your mind on a ballot question. Once you if your vote by mail has been received, that's the ballot that you've cast. Is that correct?
That's correct. And you can't do that for a couple of reasons. So when you cast a provisional ballot, you're saying I did not cast a vote by mail ballot, right? So it's not, I don't want to say, it's fraudulent to cast a provisional ballot knowingly already having voted a vote by mail ballot. It's voting twice. So sometimes people do this unintentionally, of course. They forget that they might have filled something out and they did it so long ago or something like that. And that's caught, so that they definitely, both ballots aren't counted. But to do it knowingly is a different story. You can't cast one ballot and then go to a polling location and cast it again. That's double voting.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't see any other questions, but again, for those of you on the line, we did allow plenty of time. So if things occur to you, feel free to type them in. Someone wants to know if they can share the graphic about the 4 main issues with the mail-in ballot. I assume that means the 4 main problems and what to do about them.
Sure, the slide. Yeah, so the slides, anybody can use these. And that makes me also think that we should maybe upload a graphic like that to our social media graphics for folks to use. So I'll make a note to create a specific social media graphic about what mistakes to avoid. And then folks are welcome to use the graphics in any way to help us spread accurate information.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So I think we'll move on, and then again we can come back to anything that people need to. Let me just do one more sweep. Just by way of a reminder, we are recording the session, and we will upload the full recording and the slides within the next couple of days. Time is of the essence, obviously, here, so we'll do our best to turn this around very, very quickly. Okay, so let's move on for the moment, and then, as I said, we can always come back. This is the segment where I kind of remind people about some guidelines and do's and don'ts with respect to 501c3 organizations and staying nonpartisan. And the watchword here is there is a fair amount that public charities, 501c3 public charities, can do in the voter engagement field, as long as you know what some of the rules are and that you follow them. That's obviously very important, and Jesse has touched on some of them already, but this is more around the tax exemption and that kind of thing. So the first thing to keep in mind is that as a 501c3 organization, you are prohibited from trying to influence the election or defeat of any election for any candidate for public office, whether this is a partisan election or a nonpartisan election. The penalties for doing that are very, very stiff, so you need to make sure that you're on the right side of that boundary. When you are on the right side of that boundary, there's a lot that you can do, but there are some guiding principles that you need to keep in mind. First and foremost, your activities need to be nonpartisan. Whatever you're doing needs to be carefully structured so that you are avoiding bias, either direct or implied, toward one candidate or party or another. You can't coordinate formally or informally with partisan entities, candidates, parties, PACs, 501c4s that are involved in trying to influence the outcome of elections, 501c6s that are involved in influencing the outcome of elections. You can't coordinate with any of these entities. You have to stay scrupulously on the side of neutrality and nonpartisanship. When you are issuing communications, it's always a good idea to include a disclaimer, just to reiterate that your organization is a 501c3 public charity, you're a nonpartisan entity, you don't endorse candidates or parties, etc. Now, of course, as an individual, you are free to do a whole lot more. You can run for office, you can be involved, you can contribute to campaigns, you can do all sorts of things. But all of that has to be on your own time, on your own dime, and not under the auspices of your organization, not using the organization's name, resources, assets in any way. Those are some really broad and hard and fast kind of guidelines. So some things that you cannot do, and this is kind of just building on what I was talking about a moment ago. Electioneering. Electioneering is trying to influence the election or defeat of a candidate for public office. And again, this applies to nonpartisan elections as well as partisan elections. And it's federal, state, local, county, it doesn't matter what level of government, you cannot do it. And again, you can't coordinate your voter engagement efforts with a particular party or any entity trying to influence the election or defeat of any candidate or party. You can't be involved in partisan activities. You can't align your organization with one party over the other. And again, as a reminder, all of these activities on your own time as a private citizen, not representing your organization, is okay. A little word about organization hat versus individual. You'll want to be extra attentive if what you're doing, if you are, let's say, the executive or the CEO or kind of known as the face of your organization. Certainly as an individual, you can do all sorts of things, but you might want to just be careful in terms of making sure that your activities as an individual are not misinterpreted to be those as of the organization. So that's some of what you absolutely cannot do. Here's some of what you can do, and we've just been talking about it, and we talked about it back in August and at plenty of other times as well. As long as you are following safeguards, voter registration, voter education, getting out the vote, transportation to the polls, helping people vote, you can send position statements to candidates. And there's a lot more, and I'm going to get into some do's and don'ts in just a moment. But the watchword here is whatever you do, you want to avoid bias toward one candidate or party or the other. That's really, kind of your litmus test as you're going through with this. Another important note about referenda and ballot questions. A ballot question is not an election of a candidate for public office. You as a 501c3 public charity are allowed to lobby, and trying to influence the passage or defeat of a ballot question is lobbying. It's not prohibited electioneering. So you are allowed to do it. You have to track it. It's governed by the same limits as legislative lobbying. Just make sure that as you're doing this, you keep the discussion of those issues separate from the discussion of the candidates. The other thing you need to know is that there are other rules you need to follow. If you are spending as an organization more than $1,600 to influence the outcome of a ballot question, and this year I believe we have 3, you need to register with the Election Law Enforcement Commission in New Jersey and follow their rules as well. But it's really important to keep in mind there is a difference between a ballot question, which you can be involved in trying to influence, versus trying to elect or defeat a candidate, which is absolutely prohibited. And I mean, I know we're pretty far into the election season already, but if you have not initiated these activities, or even if you have, it's always important to make sure you've got the commitment of your organization's leadership, your executive staff, and your board. It's important to know what the rules are from the IRS and from the state of New Jersey. And we at the Center for Nonprofits have more information about that on our website and elsewhere if you need it. Make sure that you are reviewing and complying with any government or private grant or contract restrictions. You obviously don't want to engage in activities that are prohibited under those contracts, and make sure that you take the time to train your team, your paid staff, your volunteers, etc., so that they understand what the guidelines are and how they can engage in this activity safely. Again, there's a lot that can be done, but you want to make sure that you're doing it in as safe a way as possible. So with that in mind, here are just a few basic do's and don'ts. A lot of this information has come from either the IRS regulations themselves or 2 great resources, the Alliance for Justice Boulder Advocacy Initiative and Nonprofit Vote, and I'll provide the links to both of those later in the presentation. But some do's and don'ts, some things that you want to make sure don't trip you up as you're engaging in these activities. So as I mentioned before, do keep your registration and engagement efforts completely nonpartisan. It's always a good idea to document that. Make sure you've got a plan in place that reaffirms that you are doing this on a nonpartisan basis. Don't plan or conduct your voter engagement activities with the intent of influencing which parties or candidates win the election. Do coordinate your activities with other 501c3s that are conducting nonpartisan voter engagement. Jesse provided some great resources, and there are plenty of others. There's so many great organizations that are involved in this space and are doing it as a nonpartisan basis. So partner up with them, share their information. You can coordinate with them. What you don't want to do is coordinate again. You cannot coordinate with any of the entities that are trying to influence the outcome of the election. You don't want to do that. That will get yourself into some trouble. In terms of encouraging people to vote, you can do things like focus on the clients, the networks that you already work with, the clients that you serve, the community members that you serve, or people that are already engaged in your organization. What you can't do is selectively target any specific populations or community members because you think they might be more inclined or less inclined to vote a certain way. You can also do things like focus on populations that have been historically underrepresented at the polls, young people, low-income community members, people who have completed their criminal sentences and are now eligible to vote, people with disabilities. Historically disenfranchised people you may certainly encourage them to vote and focus in that way. Again, you cannot reach out or be selective about reaching out to underrepresented populations because you think that they're more likely to vote a certain way. When you set up, and again, everything in person is kind of up in the air, but certainly people are gathering in person for various purposes. You can do things like mentioning voter registration and how important it is and the date of the election. You don't want to be distributing or sharing campaign information on behalf of candidates or parties. You want to keep things neutral, factual only, that kind of thing. You are not supposed to be a mouthpiece for a candidate or campaign, and you want to avoid any even inadvertent result of doing that. Don't forget your staff. Actually, it's a do. It's a do. Remember your staff. Encourage your staff and volunteers to register and vote, but you can do things also like provide a day off for your staff to go vote. That's certainly a very important way to encourage people to participate. What you don't want to do, of course, is try to steer them in terms of what kind of vote they cast. You don't want to tell them or induce them or incentivize them to vote a certain way. And also don't do things, you don't want to do things like inconsistently enforce your personnel policies in a way that might favor a particular party or candidate over another. In terms of interacting with candidates, again, there's a lot you can do, but you have to be really careful. You can do things like sharing your existing position statements equally with all candidates. You can encourage all candidates to to adopt your positions on issues. What you don't want to do is prepare or provide position statements to one candidate or one campaign that you're not making publicly available elsewhere or making broadly available to all of the others. You don't want to ask candidates to take a pledge or otherwise promise to adopt your position if elected. That it seems like a small difference, but it's the difference between the IRS thinking that there's some sort of deal there that if they pledge to endorse your position, then you're going to somehow support or endorse them. So you don't want to go that far. You can certainly, as I said, share your position statements, encourage them to read your position statements and adopt your positions on issues, but don't ask them to take a pledge. Don't ask them to make a promise. Again, there's a little bit, there's some subtle differences between how you can encourage people to vote. That some that are okay. You want to be neutral on the issues. You don't want to present the issues that are at stake in a way that might encourage people to think that there's a right or wrong way to vote. Alliance for Justice offered this example. One that's perfectly fine and neutral is we want our government to hear about the needs of the elderly, register and vote. contrast that with our government has been ignoring the needs of the elderly, register and vote. That kind of suggests that you want people to vote against the folks that are already in office, and you don't want to go that far. Here's another one. Make sure your voice is heard this election. Vote November 3rd is perfectly fine. It's neutral, as opposed to it's time for a change. Vote November 3rd. Again, that suggests that there is a direction that you want the voter or would-be voter to take. So those are just a few kinds of things that you can keep in mind. A word about social media, and again, this is very quick, and there's a lot more by way of resources available from Nonprofit Vote, Alliance for Justice, and others. But by all means, use social media and your website to promote nonpartisan voter participation. It's absolutely crucial, and you can do that. Make sure that you've got disclaimers just to reiterate that you are nonpartisan. What you want to be careful about is tagging, retweeting, sharing, etc., posts that are from political campaigns or partisan organizations that have endorsed candidates or parties. You don't want to do anything that is going to create the impression that your organization is endorsing candidates or parties. So that's something that you don't want to do. Just by way of reminder, and then we will have time to get back to questions for me and for Jesse. You can, as a 501c3 public charity, conduct nonpartisan voter education and engagement activities. You can provide technical assistance to legislative bodies. You may not be involved in partisan political activities or electioneering or contributing to political candidates, committees, or parties. You can engage in advocacy without limit. There's a general discussion of issues that are important to your organization that's outside the campaign arena. There's a lot of issue advocacy that's still going on. Obviously, our elected officials in Congress and in Trenton and on the local level are still meeting. So you can still be and should continue to be involved in those discussions. And of course, you're allowed to lobby. You can influence legislation as long as it's an insubstantial part of your activities. We have a boatload of information available about that on our website. We've done sessions about it, so we can certainly share any of that you might be interested in. So let me see what's in the question pane and see what we've got. Question, can you share a good disclaimer statement if your organization is sending out information about voting to members, etc.? I'm sure we can. I'm sure we have them at the center. And Jesse, I don't know if you have standard disclaimers one way or the other. I'm sure we can share them. But do you have something already in place, Jesse, that you use?
What we usually just say is that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse or oppose candidates running for office, and that tends to be on the majority of our information. I'm sure that something similar could be used by others.
Okay, great. But we'll share what you have. We certainly used them when we conducted some candidate questionnaires. That's another area that C3s can do as long as they are careful in following the rules. But we had disclaimers all over the place in terms of that. So we'll share what we've done as well in the follow-up information to the webinar. Another person, can you go over again, Jesse, how you check if you are a registered active voter?
Sure. So on the New Jersey Division of Elections website, so when you go to vote.nj.gov, that brings you to the 2020 NJ voter information portal. And there's these boxes, and one says, am I registered? When you click it, a voter search page will come up. It'll ask for your first name, middle name, last name, and date of birth. When you put that in, information about your voting record your registration will come up. So it'll say, your name, where you're registered, if your registration status is active, and your voter ID. Just note that when you use the voter search portal, some things like your middle initial, or there might be a space in your last name. If something doesn't come up for you right away, kind of just think, well, did I register with a middle initial, or Do, you know, if my name is like D something, did they accidentally make a space? And if you can't find your information and believe it should be there, then you should contact your county commissioner of registration or superintendent of elections to verify your voter registration status.
And we can put a link to some of the how to do these things in the follow-up information too. The other thing I wanted to mention, you may have mentioned it, Jesse, but some of the county boards of elections have put together videos with respect to walking people through the vote by mail process and some of the other key things. So some of those are really, really helpful because they give you a visual about exactly how to do things. And many of them are also available in more than one language. So that's very, very helpful. Yeah. Another question, if you have position statements, can you list them on your website, blog, or social media and not share them specifically with candidates? Is there anything you have to do there? The short answer is nonprofits, 501c3s are allowed without limit to advocate on issues. Advocacy is taking a position on an issue without contacting a legislator to ask them to reflect a view on that legislation. So if you just decide you want to put out a position statement on important environmental issues, you can post that on your website, and absolutely you can link to it, you can encourage people to look at it, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, making those things widely available is a really good idea. Where you're probably alluding to the do and don't when I said don't share these things with one candidate specifically. You don't want to do anything that's going to inadvertently favor one candidate or the other. But by having it on your website, you're making these things available broadly. And also the fact that it's even better if you do this throughout the year anyway, so that you're not that it's not in the proximity of an election. So the short answer is yes, there's a lot that you can do by putting your position statements on key issues of the day on your website, and just steer clear of anything that's going to reflect bias on the outcome of the election or anything like that. But issue positions are absolutely fine. Question, will all provisional ballots be counted despite results from the mail-in and in-person machine ballots?
Yes. So this is a common misconception where folks think that if the election is close or already kind of statistically called, that they don't count provisional ballots. That's not true. They always count the provisional ballots that are eligible. So if a voter is eligible to cast a ballot, that ballot will be counted. And Linda, I thought maybe I talk a little bit about some of the other information that's available on this voter engagement portal that we have here for you all to use, for nonprofits to use as you see fit. One of the things that we have up is about misinformation and disinformation, which is incredibly critical this election season. And it's one of the reasons why I'm so glad to be having this conversation with folks and partnering. So as everybody knows, misinformation is kind of the unintentional sharing of false information, while disinformation is sharing things, with the intent to harm or cause confusion. So as you are navigating information online, a couple of tips that I think are important, and we have graphics for folks that want to share this with the people you serve, is of course, consider the source of the information and really dig in. Check the date, cross-check all information, and kind of be skeptical of emotionally charged content. And then some of the kind of, beyond that, the do's and don'ts of coming across this information on social media. And I'm just learning this stuff myself, so I love to share it. But one of the things that I've learned this season is, don't share the bad information when you're trying to correct it. So if your nonprofit sees something inaccurate and you want to share correct information instead, don't reference the inaccurate information in the post. So don't say like, oh, you might have seen this misinformation coming out from so-and-so that says this, here's the right information. Because the public the misinformation is reinforced. So you want to just kind of continuously share accurate information. And then, you know, don't click on any of it, don't share it, don't engage publicly if you see misinformation or disinformation posted and it's somebody you want to, you know, ask about it, just send a private message. And, you know, you can report and block information that you think is harmful. This election season is charged, and I think that we're all, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of you know, any kind of politics, we always want to make sure that voters are getting the information that they need to participate and cast a ballot however they see fit. So combating disinformation and misinformation has become such an important part of this. And we do have that information up available on the nonprofit voter engagement site for folks to use and share. And of course, you can share our social media graphics if you like them as well.
Great. There are a few more questions, so let's try to get to as many of these as we can. Let's see, there were some questions about different ways nonprofits can share these messages with their communities, letters to the editor, op-eds, emails, social media. The short answer is yes, yes, and yes, as long as you're staying nonpartisan in your messaging. Use the League of Women Voters graphics. We'll send a follow-up email with some other ideas. Alliance for Justice has and Nonprofit Vote have some great fact sheets about ways you can engage and encourage people to vote and do it safely. So we'll share more about that. But the short answer is yes. We need to make sure that everyone who can vote votes, and we have a really important role as nonprofits to play in doing that. Another question was around, is it proper to thank elected officials or candidates? What I will say is, depending on the circumstances, yes, but you have to be careful about how you do it. We don't really have time to go into it in great detail, but I will send a link in the follow-up email to a great fact sheet from Alliance for Justice around praising or praising or criticizing incumbents. And basically, the idea is you don't want to tie it to the election. You want to tie it to policies. Again, because you're allowed to advocate, you are allowed to lobby within certain limits. If you have never thanked a candidate, or you certainly don't want to do it in their capacity as a candidate. If you're thanking them, it's because they did something in their capacity as an elected official. Again, thanking a candidate could cross the line into endorsing them. But again, I will share some information about that as well. Another question was maybe our last, is how long does it take for you to become an active voter? Of course, we know that the ballots are being sent to active voters. What has to happen for you to become inactive?
Sure. So an inactive voter, the way that's triggered is that a voter is sent a piece of election mail. So most often it's a sample ballot. And that sample ballot is returned as undeliverable for some reason. That moves a voter to inactive status. Inactive voters can still participate in elections. So let's say an inactive voter, they're not going to receive their vote by mail ballot automatically. If they go to the polls on election day and vote using a provisional ballot, that will count and that'll move them back to active. However, if they don't, after being moved to inactive, if they don't vote for, I believe, 2 federal elections, then they are eligible to be removed from the polls, so from the voting records. So that's one of the ways that the state kind of updates the statewide voter registration database when folks, you know, move or pass away or something like that through the inactive voter process.
Again, cannot thank you enough, and the League of Women Voters, for everything that you are doing to make sure that everyone in New Jersey has good quality current information about this vital election and how to be involved. I want to make sure there's nothing else in the chat box. I think we're good there. Couple things before we go. Here are some of the resources that we've been referring to through, it's not everything. Jesse had some others which we will provide in the follow-up email as well. But in terms of government enforcement and regulations, it's the IRS on the federal level and ELEC, the Election Law Enforcement Commission in New Jersey. Of course, there's also the Federal Election Commission on the federal level as well. Nonprofit Vote and BoulderAdvocacy.org, they both have tremendous resources about nonprofits and voter engagement and staying nonpartisan. If you have 501c4s or other structures, Boulder Advocacy also has information about that too. So I will share some of those that information in the follow-up email. Of course, stay connected with the League of Women Voters of New Jersey and the Center for Nonprofits. Reminder, really important reminder, the census is actually still going on. You may have heard that the Census Bureau had tried to stop data collection early. There was a court case, and so far the court rulings have been that the Census Bureau has to keep data collection going. That may go through the appeals process, but the point here is that people can still fill out their census. It's absolutely critical. We need to make sure New Jersey gets counted, and census is still live. So encourage all of your constituencies and your communities to fill it out if they haven't yet. Again, Advocates for Children of New Jersey has been spearheading efforts here in the state to secure a complete count in New Jersey. So if you haven't checked out what they're doing, do that at census2020nj.org. Again, please stay in touch with the Center for Nonprofits by our email list and on social media channels. Sometimes we can provide information by some of those channels before we can get it up on our website, but we encourage you to check our website as well. Again, I cannot thank Jesse Burns and League of Women Voters enough for everything that they're doing to make sure that we have a strong democracy and that our voting process is robust and that people can participate. Thank you to Susan O'Connor, Caitlin Giles McCormick, Kathy Hawn of our staff for putting this webinar together with me. Thanks again to Jesse Burns for sharing her expertise with us. Thank you for joining us today, for all the work that you are doing to make our communities and New Jersey better. Please stay safe, stay well, and we look forward to staying in touch.